this public meeting to discuss the rezoning of West Broad Street. You probably just got a notification that this meeting is being recorded. We're going to post it to the rezoning website probably sometime tomorrow so that folks who aren't here tonight can take a look at it. Want to also let folks know that a PDF of the presentation slides that I'll be referring to is available on our website as well. So that way you can follow along at your own leisure, or if it's not coming through clearly on the broadcast, you can look at the slides yourself. It's the city's rezoning website. Probably the easiest way to get there is just to Google Richmond rezonings, and it should be the first results. You can also go to the Planning and Development Review website and then go to Useful Links and then Rezonings. I think the link is also in the email and should be in the invite too. So anyhow, let's see. So as far as housekeeping goes, great. Well, my name is Will Palmquist. I'm a planner here in the Office of Equitable Development, which is part of Planning and Development Review. Our office is charged with implementing the recently adopted Richmond 300 master plan, which includes rezoning parts of the city based on that master plan. I have with me this evening Maritza Peachin, who is the Deputy Director for our department, who's in charge of our office here. I believe we have Kevin Bonk, the director, as well as, hey Kevin, as well as Rich Saunders, who's a little more of a zoning expert than I am. So if I need to phone a friend later during Q&A, we got him to rely on too. I'm trying to see if Councilman Addison is on the line, or Councilwoman Jordan. I think they're planning on joining us this evening. Want to let them introduce themselves if they're present. They might hop on later. We've been coordinating with them closely on this effort as well. So essentially tonight, this is our first kind of public discussion about this proposed rezoning. We've presented to City Planning Commission about a month ago, but we're still relatively early on in the process, and it's a good chance to share information and answer any questions and get some feedback on this proposal. Basically, I have about 25 or 30 slides to present the information to you all, and then the majority of the meeting is just reserved for Q&A and discussion. I have everyone muted now, and then folks can unmute themselves during Q&A. You can also raise your hand. I think if you want to, if you're calling it on the phone, it's *6 to unmute your phone line. If you're having any issues, audio visual wise, or need to reach me directly, my phone number here is 804-646-6307. So give me a ring if you during Q&A if you can't unmute yourself or anything like that. All right, so rezoning West Broad Street, and here's current condition today. Basically, this rezoning is started off with a resolution by City Council to rezone the area of West Broad west of I-195 to the city limits from the B3 General Business District to the TOD1 Transit-Oriented Nodal District. This map generally shows that area highlighted in orange. So you can see West Broad, west of 195, all the way to the city boundary, including some properties on Staples Mill Road and Hamilton Street and Kent Road as well. So this is generally the area that we'll be talking about in detail this evening. And then this is all based on the Richmond 300 master plan, which was updated and adopted in December of 2020. And just some background on that plan. This is the overall vision for the city. It's a 20-year plan. So the idea is that in 2037 Richmond is a welcoming, inclusive, diverse, innovative, and equitable city of thriving neighborhoods, ensuring a high quality of life for all. There are 6 big moves in that plan as outlined here, 2 of which are most relevant this evening. One is rewriting the zoning ordinance, and the other is reimagining priority growth nodes. The plan is also online, and there's a lot of different strategies and other goals that are outlined to help achieve the overall vision for the city in 2037. And this map shows the citywide nodes. You can see the priority growth nodes are in orange. There's a few in downtown, Greater Scotts Addition, a few in Southside, also Stony Point Fashion Park. We are focusing on these 2 smaller nodes, so they're not priority nodes. They're identified in the plan as neighborhood nodes. So they're smaller in scale, but still kind of a cluster for development. So those are Broad and Malvern Avenue, and then Broad and Staples Mill Road. And then next few slides are a lot of text, so bear with me. Well, many of the slides later on are lots of maps and pictures, but just to get through some of the text here to give some background about what the plan has to say about these areas. So this is what Richmond 300 kind of envisions for the future based on feedback and outreach to the community for the Broad and Staples Mill node. So basically, the idea is that around that Staples Mill Pulse BRT station, it gets redeveloped into a more walkable, denser kind of neighborhood with mixed-use buildings and streetscape improvements. It serves as more of a landmark and a gateway into the city along Broad Street. And the very first primary next step for that node to achieve that future is to rezone that area from the current B3 to a more appropriate zoning district. There's other steps along the way, such as improving the design standards, improving the bike and ped infrastructure to and from the BRT Pulse station and the neighborhood. Also, transform Broad Street into what we call in the plan a great street. So that includes things like a bus-only lane, widening the sidewalks, burying power lines, enhancing the landscape, etc. There's also a short vision for the node that's identified at Broad and Malvern Avenue. So instead of this spot being like a dead spot along the corridor, becomes a place with multifamily, retail, offices, and it's supported by a walkable, bikeable, and transit-ready environment with the addition of a potential new Pulse BRT station there. And those next steps include rezoning the area to allow for residential uses and also working with GRTC for a infill Pulse station. Now, this whole area was also examined in even closer detail back in 2017 with the adoption of the Pulse Corridor Plan. And that plan was readopted along with Richmond 300, so it's still relevant today. These are the 3 main goals in that plan, basically saying that in the future, development along the entire Pulse Corridor, which goes all the way from Staples Mill along Broad through downtown, and then through Shaka Bottom and Church Hill on East Main Street. So that whole section is compact and mixed. So buildings are taller and closer together, and their uses are mixed together. The areas are connected, not only along the route, but also between neighborhoods and the stations with bike and ped facilities and other design aspects that make getting around easier without a vehicle, without a car. And then the development's also thriving and equitable. So that means it provides not only rising property values and more economic activity, but also raises the income and raises opportunity for everyone to benefit as part of that development occurs. And the Pulse Corridor Plan has a lot to say about this area as well. Similar to Richmond 300, so I'm not going to reiterate everything, but basically, redeveloping underutilized parcels, parking lots. Bring my light back on. It doesn't want to go back on, so bear with me. No, there it goes. So basically, there's a lot of opportunity at the Broad and Staples Mill node, and both this plan and Richmond 300 identify that opportunity and promote ways of getting there. The plan also talks a lot about pedestrian and bicycle connections. So it identifies specifically new sidewalks that are currently missing, such as along Chantilly and Blacker streets. And this would help fill in the pedestrian network, also providing new bicycle facilities to the area. This proposed rezoning is not going to result in sidewalks being created as part of the rezoning itself, but it'll help, I believe, to increase the need for those facilities and kind of showcase the fact that new development, new activity are making this area a priority for those kinds of improvements, and they kind of go hand in hand and are less chicken and egg, but more kind of symbiotic as far as that goes. Also talks about bike infrastructure as well. So getting from the Pulse stations to neighborhoods. And there are some transportation improvements that are funded in future years for this area of the city. First and foremost is the funding for a new Pulse BRT curbside station at Broad Street and Kent Road, or somewhere in that vicinity. So that's kind of near the Malvern or within the Malvern node. So therefore, it gives an opportunity for adding more development and activity at that Pulse BRT station in the future. There's also improvements on Broad Street, such as sidewalks and ADA accessible ramps, things like pedestrian crossings, streetscape amenities are scheduled to be funded in 2026 and 2027 fiscal years, and then construction in fiscal year 2029 and 2030. Sounds a long way away, but be there before we know it. So this map basically shows the existing land uses in this section of the city. You can see the majority of land uses along West Broad are commercial, as shown in the red color. There's also a lot of office uses in the pink, especially along Staples Mill and then down near Kent Road and Hamilton. And you can see the area is adjacent to this large residential neighborhood that is primarily single family with some multifamily mixed in as well. This map's kind of interesting because it really speaks to the opportunity that we have here. Basically, this shows every property that's being considered to be rezoned. And in black is surface parking and circulation and driveways. So almost half of the real estate in the area is used for parking or circulation. So that just goes to show all the opportunity that exists on these properties to be redeveloped into buildings and actual activity and value, as opposed to what's currently there today, which some parcels are totally full of buildings, and then some in the black are just parking or circulation. And now this map shows the existing zoning with the area that we're focusing on highlighted in the orange. So the majority along Broad Street is B3 general commercial general business. This was what was identified in the council resolution adopted back in March. We have since kind of expanded the scope to include other zoning districts in the area, such as the R02, R73 along Hamilton, R53 here, B2 south of Broad, and then R02 and R01 districts that are between Broad Street and the neighborhood as well. And City Planning Commission passed a resolution of intent a month ago to examine these additional areas as well. So what is allowed in these districts currently? You can see in this chart of the 5 different zoning districts that currently exist in the area, the different uses that are allowed. So such as in the B2 and B3 commercial districts, you can really do a variety of different things, retail and service, including auto service centers, gas stations, drive-up facilities, things that are not necessarily part of the vision in the future or don't necessarily work well with the type of future environment that the planning documents that are adopted speak to. The RO1 and 2, which is residential and office districts, are mostly residential, but they allow for offices and some limited retail and service. And then the R53 is a mostly multifamily, single and two-family residential district that allows for some additional uses as well. You can see in this column, which is probably the most telling part of this slide, that the maximum height of these zoning districts is very low. So most of them are 35 feet maximum height for buildings, except for the RO1, which is only 25 feet. So that might get you a 2-story building, and then the rest of them might get you a 3-story building, and that's the maximum height that's allowed by right. There's also substantial front yards required in these districts, except for the B3. So these other districts, you basically mandate that the building has to be 25 feet away from the curb line, the sidewalk, or 15 feet away. So what you end up getting is what you see there today, very short buildings with auto-oriented uses that are very far away from the street with parking lots in front, which is kind of the opposite of the future vision for the area. And you can see the parking that's required for these uses as well. Somewhat, not a lot required for residential in the B2 and B3, but still a decent amount. 1 per single family dwelling, 2 per 2-family dwelling, so mostly 1 per dwelling unit in the other districts. And then for commercial uses, the parking is just based on the square footage of those uses, basically. And now this map shows the master plan future land use. So this is basically what Richmond 300 future master plan vision has to say for the area. This isn't zoning. This is just a broad brush kind of visionary land use designation that we use in the plan to help move neighborhoods in the right direction, to get to different rezonings, whether it's rezonings that we do or rezonings or special use permits that landowners are applying for. So you can see there's only 10 categories in the entire city, so it's a very broad type of designation, but this helps us to envision the future generally, and then you get into the specifics with the zoning districts. And you can see here that in the red, most of Broad Street and then Kent Road and Hamilton Street are what we call corridor mixed use. And then the area at Staples Mill Road is what we call destination mixed use. And now what that means is that the Richmond 300 plan envisions that destination mixed use areas function as key gateways. They have a mix of uses, they are higher density, and they involve transit-oriented development, such as the Pulse BRT. You can see all the different kinds of uses that work well together in this potential future. And then buildings are typically a minimum of 5 stories without a real hard maximum. Basically, this is kind of like a downtown, outside of downtown type development. The other land use on that map along Broad Street from the Richmond 300 plan is corridor mixed use. So these are found along major commercial corridors that are envisioned to be medium to medium high density development. The mix of uses are shown there. So residential and office, retail, cultural, open space, all work well together. buildings are generally 2 to 10 stories in height, but that can kind of change based on the width of the street, historic context, and it should also step down in height towards residential areas. And now this map shows that future land use with the TOD1 proposed zoning district shown on top. You can see that it pretty closely follows the future land use as outlined in the master plan. There are a few discrepancies, based on a more closer examination of the area, but for the most part, what's being proposed is rezoning the B3 along Broad, and then the RO1 and 2 and B2 and R53 districts, all to TOD1, which is based on the corridor and destination mixed uses from the master plan that I was just speaking about. This map just shows it more clearly. So the orange would be TOD1 as proposed currently. You can notice that it includes properties on the west side of Staples Mill Road, and then basically the commercial areas that are adjacent to the R5 single-family residential areas are separated by alleys. There are streets separating the side yards, such as Chantilly and Westmoreland, and then following alleys mostly between the TOD1 along Broad and other commercial areas, and then the R5 residential. And we'll speak a little bit more about the condition between the TOD1 and the R5 areas, which is really important. And the TOD1 has very specific language about what happens when you have the TOD1 zoning district across an alley from a single family R district. So we'll speak to that momentarily. And now this slide just lists all the permitted principal and accessory uses that are allowed by right in the TOD1 zoning districts. You can see it's a pretty long list. Includes things like dwelling units, so residential, hotels, retail, service, restaurants, offices, repair shops, art galleries. You can see it doesn't include things like gas stations or auto service repair or dealerships or those kinds of very auto-oriented districts. It's a very permissive district, but it's also a district where the types of uses work well in a more kind of urban or village style development and are less auto-oriented than a lot of uses that currently exist in the area. And then there are a couple of uses that you have to get a conditional use permit for. So those are actually go through the Planning Commission and City Council. Those include nightclubs and then any kind of use that does social service delivery. Now, this is the slide I was speaking to just a moment ago. It talks about the maximum and minimum heights in the TOD1 zoning districts. So in most conditions, you can have buildings up to 12 stories in height and a minimum of 2 stories in height. But what happens if a parcel that's zoned TOD1 is either next to or across an alley from a R residential district, certain conditions are placed on the allowed height of that new building. And you can see it illustrated here, essentially, and this is a different section of Broad, but it's the same scenario. I think this is the Science Museum of Virginia, and our in-house planner Yesenia Revilla worked on this graphic. You can see this is the residential area, so this would be a typical house with a garage in the back. You would have an alley between the residential area and the commercial area. The building would have to be 20 feet back from the edge of that alley, and then at 20 feet, you could only do 3 stories of height. And at that point, basically an inclined plane gets superimposed at a 1-to-1 ratio, and the building can't kind of go past that 1-to-1 inclined plane. So what ends up happening is that the building kind of has to terrace itself away from the residential area and towards the commercial street and Broad Street in this instance. And, you might be able to get 7 or 8 stories before you kind of max out the floor area. That's all on the front side of the parcel. And that way you don't have, super tall buildings looming right over residential areas. It gives kind of relief to those. So the way that this particular requirement is written, and then the way that the proposed zoning is drafted on the map basically means that you won't have, because they're across alleys from each other, you won't necessarily have 12-story buildings right next to residential areas. You might have them across side streets, but they wouldn't be right up against someone's backyard or right at the alley, 12 stories high. So that's an important consideration that we thought a lot about in this particular case. These are the required setbacks for TOD1. Essentially, there's no front yard required unless you have a dwelling unit or residential unit on the ground floor, in which case it's a minimum of 10 feet and a maximum of 15 feet. For both the side yard and the rear yard, the requirement is 0, unless you're in a situation where you're next to or across an alley from an R district, in which case the 20 feet setback is required, and then the inclined plane at 3 stories begins. Parking in the TOD1 as far as required off-street parking. So what the city would require is basically for residential buildings, there is no parking required for buildings with fewer than 16 units. And then above 16 units, you'd have to provide at least 1 parking space per 2 units. And for commercial uses, there's no parking required except for hotels and motels, in which case it's 1 per guest room. And this isn't to say that a project can't provide more parking, and in many cases, a new project or apartment building would provide much more parking than this. For a transit-oriented development kind of district, we didn't want to artificially set a high floor. Rather keep the floor low, but allow them to provide more parking as needed in their judgment of the market and their clientele that they might be targeting in their projects. There's a few special design considerations in TOD1. Windows are required for a certain amount on the main street frontage. Parking lots and driveways have to be located off the front, not at the front of the property. So the parking has to be in the rear, and buildings are located in the front of the property. And the parking lots have to be screened with landscaping as well. And then one of the final points about this rezoning is shown in these orange and blue lines. The orange is the street-oriented commercial, and the blue is priority streets. I'll explain those in a second. Basically, West Broad Street is proposed to be street-oriented commercial and the priority street, and then priority streets on Kent Road, Hamilton Street, North Thompson Street, and Staples Mill Road. So what that means along Broad Street is that a certain amount of the ground floor of new buildings would require commercial uses. So either 1/3 or 1,000 square feet, whichever is greater of the floor area, would have to be some use other than residential. So the idea being that along these major commercial corridors, it's not just apartment blocks after another without any ground floor activity. You'd have things like retail or offices or restaurants, things that provide activity and kind of enliven the street, so to speak. And folks can provide more, obviously. This is just setting the floor requirement for those types of uses. And then the other aspect is the priority street designation that was shown in the blue lines for those 4 street segments. And basically, this just adds special urban design requirements for those streets for properties and new buildings located on those streets. basically means you can't have driveways or parking lots off of those streets. Things like hotels and parking decks have to be screened with another principal use around the ground floor. Let's see, and there's also special fenestration or window requirements on these streets as well. And this usually comes up when you have a building at a corner. So let's say at the corner of Staples Mill and Broad Street, where you want to, have special considerations for both elevations, both of that building on both of those streets, but only one street is the main street or the principal street as defined by zoning. But this kind of forces a new building to have special design on both of those streets, essentially. And the last part, just to speak about generally, is the idea of non-conforming uses. So basically what happens in a situation where the underlying zoning district for a property is changed, the existing use on the site may no longer be allowed by right. So this would happen in this section of Broad Street for all the uses that are very auto-oriented, like the gas stations and auto service centers and those types of things. They would become non-conforming because they're not allowed in the proposed TOD1 zoning district. Basically, what that means is that they're allowed to, remain where they are currently and continue to operate. They're not going to be kicked out or have to move necessarily or anything like that. However, they won't be able to expand their business or their building in that case, and are not able to rebuild their structure in the case of a complete loss. So the idea being that, new uses that are not allowed can't move into the area after it gets rezoned. Existing uses that are not allowed can stay, but they can't expand or be rebuilt. Over time, it allows for the desirable uses that are identified in the plan and the zoning district to replace those uses that are no longer part of the vision for the area. And then this is the timeline, the process that we've laid out so far, very broadly. Essentially, the initial resolution was passed back in March. We presented to City Planning Commission a month ago in September. We're here October 20th at our first public meeting. We may schedule more as needed going forward if things go super smoothly and best case scenario as far as quickly getting this approved and adopted, that would be January of 2022. But kind of playing that by ear, it doesn't have to be adopted in that month. That would be as fast as possible. And then this is our website again that we're going to be posting information on. Like I said, the presentation's posted there. Recording of this meeting will be posted there as well. And we kind of use that website as our main source for any kinds of city-led rezoning efforts like this one going forward. And that's it for the presentation. Appreciate your patience. This is my contact information. We're basically just asking folks to reach out to me directly with any questions or comments between now and whenever we wrap this up. So please email or call me. And again, I want to see if, I believe we have Councilperson Addison on the line. I see his name and welcome him to speak if he so chooses. Not to put him on the spot, but thank him for sharing up tonight.
Mr. Palmquist, thank you. This is exactly the same presentation you gave us about a month ago, and I appreciate your explanation on the changes being proposed. This is something that came up as a conversation a while ago, and I think that there's a need to look at our completing of the Pulse Corridor rezoning, which this is, I think, one of the last pieces not touched as part of this plan. And I think the future proposal for a Malvern BRT bus stop, which has been, I think, conversation for a while, would be a great asset to add to Thomas Jefferson High School. and as well as UMFS and what they've developed in the front of their property as well. But I also kind of want to see what the rest of this part of the district and the city can be part of a gateway. And that's what I think this zoning provides, is that framework of creating a gateway for the city, the first district, as part of what we look at in the city. I want this part of Broad Street to be something we're proud of. And I would say, bluntly, I don't think driving down Broad Street makes me feel very proud to represent that part of Broad Street. It's not very lively. It's kind of empty. And as you saw in that analysis, it's almost 50% surface parking lots or surface road surfaces. So we have some opportunities, I think, to kind of create some energy and liveliness to it. I know Henrico is looking to do things on their side of the street, just north of Broad Street as well. So this is just trying to put in motion a conversation around these types of opportunities. And as I think you also see, we're not trying to encroach upon neighborhoods and build directly adjacent to anyone's backyard. We have protections in the current zoning to make sure that the proper setbacks and respecting of existing homes is incorporated in the plans moving forward. And so this is a conversation I look forward to continuing with you all, and seeing how this might create opportunities and access. More importantly, one of the biggest complaints I get from the neighborhood just south of there is a need for infrastructure, sidewalks, curbs, and gutters, especially in the north and south streets that are missing. Well, with a project like this and projects that could come, I think you could start seeing me being able to push and prioritize getting those long overdue infrastructure projects prioritized and funded. So that's one of the opportunities we're trying to create together. So thank you for this. That's my explanation. I look forward to seeing how our conversations move forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So yeah, like I said, we're just gonna open it up for Q&A. There is the hand raise function. If folks want to use that, that might be a little more organized, and I can call on folks, or unmute yourself and have a free for all, and we'll see what happens. It's we'll figure it out as we go. You can call me as well, 646-6307 if you can't get through, or press *6 if you're on the phone to unmute yourself as well. All right, I see Michael has his hand raised.
Yeah, I don't have the question. I just wanted to say, as someone who is very passionate about getting as many people as possible out of cars, which in turn allows people who really have a true need to be in cars a much easier time to get around. I like a lot of what I've heard tonight, from mentioning in the link in the email about the resolution passed to eliminate parking minimums, and just the idea generally of increasing density and making things transit oriented. I mean, this is all green flags, I guess you would say, and I just love everything I've heard. I just wanted to say that.
Great, thank you. And yeah, just to maybe expand on what you just mentioned, the elimination of parking requirements is not part of this rezoning, but that is a resolution that was passed by council that is something that we'll be working on separately. But this rezoning will at least reduce quite a bit the amount of parking required for new uses in the area. All right. Anyone else? It can be another very complimentary thing. It doesn't have to be a question too. So, okay, we got Jenny Daly.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for this. I do live in the area like Blacker and Chantilly near Broad, and so I'm excited about this and just also want to understand it. And I understood what you were saying about the setbacks from the alley, and I was trying to understand if that still applies when you're across the street from a residential district. I didn't know what abuts meant in in planning language.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So if it's across the street, then this requirement does not come into effect. It's only if you're abutting means that the property lines are touching,
Okay.
which doesn't happen as we've drawn it so far. There's not a situation where a proposed TOD1 is right next to an R district property. There are some cases where it's across a side street. So the north-south street might separate it. So you have building facing the street, another TOD1 facing the street. They're not facing each other, but they're separated by a north-south street.
Okay.
So that does happen. Most of the cases, it's separated by the alley, which is why this diagram would apply most of the time.
Okay. And then the other question I had was whether TOD1 does any requirements about tree or green roofs or any of that. All that parking based on the Science Center study makes us part of like the heat island effect, honestly, in Richmond. And I was wondering if there's any thought about trying to offset some of that with requirements.
That's a great question. There is not specific requirements in the TOD1 for things like green roofs or trees, but there are requirements for usable open space in the zoning. So there's a certain amount of the land that might need to just be neither parking nor building. It's not a lot because this is a more urban district. I think going forward, the strategy is more trying to find ways to incentivize future development to do things like green roofs or be LEED certified or that kind of thing. A lot of that's also being done through the RVA Green 2050 plan. And so that might be coming down the pike in the future. We've also outlined different ways in Richmond 300 to do that. So it's more, I think, carrot approach and less stick at this point. As far as the zoning goes. But I could see, with redevelopment happening and then more attention being placed on this part of the corridor and then the streetscape improvements being funded in future years, definitely the opportunity to add street trees on Broad Street. Currently, in this section of West Broad, there are hardly any street trees at least. So I could see a lot, going in the future, hopefully. But no, as written in the TOD1, this rezoning will not result necessarily in structures requiring green roofs, but maybe encouraging these higher quality buildings that are taller, and there's more. It's a bigger project. You can potentially see those types of amenities and things like that because they're desirable for tenants and future residents of them. So I think allowing taller buildings, especially in this part of the city that's getting the new transit station and that kind of thing, you could definitely see more kind of green amenities and open space in a higher quality building like we're hoping gets built here.
Thanks, that's helpful. And when you need help pushing for street trees, reach out. And then I just wanted to clarify, it sounded like there were 2 pulse stations that were mentioned, one at Kent and one at Malvern. Is that really what's being sorted out right now?
No, it would just be the one. The information that I received from Public Works talks about one at Kent Road. We've identified Malvern as being kind of the location or the node of activity. But that would just be one station somewhere in that vicinity. I don't think it's been identified super precisely yet, but it would just be one future pulse BRT station near Kent Road that would basically fill the gap between Scotts Dish and Staples Mill that exists today.
Thanks.
This is Commissioner Murphy. Hope you guys are doing well. Thanks for the presentation. I wanted to tag along on a couple of things, but most immediately the street trees. I'm glad that was brought up. Thank you for discussing that and mentioning that broad and talking to end this conversation about great streets, because there are no trees on that section of Broad. I live in the area, I walk that area, and there's space for it. There should be trees on Broad Street. Pedestrian crossing is very difficult. Bike crossing is very difficult. So I hope that it becomes a critical component of this piece as we look to enforce it, create it, drive it. Another piece I wanted to discuss was bike lanes and pedestrian crossings. Councilman Addison knows very well my passion around that, especially as we have protected bike lanes on Malvern, but people are still parking in them today. So we're looking to create this, implement. We've got to find a better way to both design them as well as enforce them. And when we think about especially crossing of Broad Street or even moving along with Broad Street with pedestrians and bikes and buses, and maybe hopefully fewer cars. And the third one is more of a question. And I think as you talk about this hopefully being adopted in, I think you said 22 or 23, how do you, we've already seen some development like a car wash go in place on Broad Street where the old Aunt Sarah's was, but that doesn't feel like that aligns with what the intent of this. How do you prevent that happening in the timeline between this gets adopted and permits being submitted?
Well, my understanding is that if the old zoning is still in place by the time they get full approval, then there's nothing stopping a project like that to proceed. So it might require a plan of development, and if that gets approved and they get their permits, then there's nothing we or anyone can really do to stop them if they've gotten full approval for a project like that before the zoning changes. If this gets adopted while they're in the middle of getting approvals, then they're out of luck, and they basically can't do what they were trying to get approval for because the zoning has changed. So it just kind of depends on the timing. We're just trying to get it done as soon as feasible based on support from the community and the council and planning commissions. So just kind of, I guess, remains to be seen how that works out. And then, but yeah, once it gets passed and approved and the zoning changes, then that kind of use would not be allowed to go in unless it got approval already through the permits and everything.
So I'll chime in a little bit about that. I think part of the reason that we're discussing this and the reasons for Councilperson Addison advancing this paper is if you look at the market and where development is happening, you can see it pushing beyond Scott's Addition, and I think that was the reason for us moving forward. What's now the Diamond District, and now looking at this area. The development pressures are significant, and I think it's in the best interest of the city to guide development that's in line with the master plan and the desired future land use for this area. And so we can have the desired future land use intact through Richmond 300, but if we don't have the underlying zoning to support it, it makes it really difficult to get those types of uses we want. So, I mean, without going too far into details, I mean, there is a fine line where a project, is considered vested, where they've relied on a certain set of pieces in place, that they submitted application or got approvals under a certain premise or a certain zoning category. But I think, as we look right now, and we made it very clear, first with Richmond 300 and now with this, that we're moving forward, to do that zoning. It's to get ahead of any projects, that would, produce uses that are not in line with that master plan.
That makes sense, Kevin. I appreciate that. Thank you. And great work, everybody. This is awesome, and much appreciation to Councilman Addison for pushing this forward. It's going to be transformational in this district, and hopefully a great opportunity to coordinate with Henrico as well and make this more of a regional opportunity for the area.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, if you touched a ton on it, but we have reached out to Henrico. They've been, offered up some initial comments on this. This is one of the tough parts, right? Like we weren't here when they were drawing the lines. But, working with what we have, and then I think just, overall, reflecting, again, getting ahead of the market and development and providing opportunities, for development that really aligns with and supports the great neighborhoods that we have around here, and the ability, to create places that are walkable, bikeable, and accessible, for transit, for all the residents of this neighborhood and in the area is a really important thing.
Give folks a few more minutes to build up any courage or think through what they're wanting to ask. But just unmuting yourself with the microphone button at the top, or pressing *6 on your phone, or calling me at 646-6307.
Will, can you share your last slide so that they see your email address, just in case anyone? There you go. Thank you.
So, yeah, if you want to take time, folks want to take time to marinate on it and reach out to me directly. There's my email and phone number, and we're accepting feedback for probably at least a few weeks. So I'd say if we could hear from folks within the next 2 or 3 weeks the most, that would be, I think, ideal for our potential time frame.
This is Jenny Daly again, and I had a question about, in your experience, so if the zoning changes to TOD1 in early 2022, how long has it been in your experience when you start to see new projects come online, start seeing permits? Just what is the kind of expectation about how long then change starts to happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was thinking about this earlier today, and there's already a lot of development, a decent amount of this kind of development already happening in the corridor, at least in the eastern section, with projects like the Ella apartments, and then the development at UMFS owned land on Broad. So we're already seeing these types of redevelopment of either vacant or underutilized property. So, I mean, it's hard to say exactly how long. I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years there's a handful of, new buildings along this section, and starting to see some noticeable changes, or even in the next few months, you could see a couple of buildings being proposed here or there. I feel like with the momentum that Broad Street has, and then the the assets of the Pulse BRT stations, and then the new one coming online at some point. You might look at this corridor in 10 years and say, wow, it's really done a 180. I wouldn't be surprised if 5 or 10 years down the road, it looks a lot different.
Yeah, I think both Will and Maritza have been here in the city longer than I have. But I think part of what this rezoning does is it allows for more types of residential development within it. And I think, it's no secret that the housing crunch in the city and in the region is real. And being able to provide opportunities to satisfy market demands for additional housing and different types of housing products, it's constrained in places that it can go in the city. And I think what you have is being able to provide, I'll call it, relieve some pressure on other parts of the neighborhood by allowing it and promoting it on the corridor that served by transit, to allow more housing products to move forward. And I think you'll generally probably see a lead with residential development, but then I think what's great about the TOD is it allows, and in many cases requires some of that ground floor commercial that, basically not only serves the residents there, but serves the neighborhood. And again, provides that enhancement to the transit corridor that's there. So I think, you can kind of see, again, what's happened in Scott's Addition and nearby. I think Will's definitely correct that, most likely you can see things sooner than later. At the end of the day, it's private investment that gets a development done. It's the responsibility of the city, to provide the, I guess the environment, and that is, through zoning and the infrastructure, that is through the transit. I think it's been discussed, hopefully in the near future, additional bike and ped accommodations. And then, based on those signals that we're sending, private investment follows.
Thanks. That's helpful. And I would just echo the need to really improve the pedestrian infrastructure to the BRT stations. If you've done them, it feels like taking your life in your hands, and it's scary to watch other people do it. And if we want people to use it, we have to make them feel safe. So look forward to seeing that as part of it too.
Well, if there's nothing else, unless anyone has any final parting remarks, I will thank everyone for attending this evening and taking the time to listen and ask questions. And yeah, please, we reached out to as many folks as we could with mailing property owners and reaching out to civic groups. But if you want to let your neighbors and colleagues and constituents know about this effort and send them to our website, I think the more folks that are aware of this, that can hopefully support it. And if not, we can work through those concerns with people and get to a better place. So yeah, the more folks that we can get involved with this, the better. So please let people know about this effort, direct them to the website. And want to thank everyone, and I will stop recording and wish everyone a good night.